Hello, Enchanting Stories family. We're about to begin a new journey of love. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Like, comment, and share. It really helps the channel grow and keeps us inspired to keep enchanting you. In the silence of an airplane cutting through the clouds towards Seattle, an unlikely story begins to take shape. Olivia Martins, 27 years old, an art teacher who lives through fleeting moments and scattered colors, has no idea that this flight will change her life. Just a few seats away, a little girl with curious eyes and boundless energy, Maya, only 5 years old, insists on turning the monotony of the trip into discovery. Beside her sits her father, Ethan Caldwell, a meticulous architect, a man of strict routine and a heart carefully kept behind walls. Fate, between carry-on bags and narrow seats, places them face to face. What seemed like an ordinary encounter will become the starting point of a journey that will test fears, reveal affections, and prove that life always holds room for the unexpected. The flight had ended, but the memories of the journey still echoed in Olivia like an unexpected melody. Maya's energy, with her endless questions and laughter that seemed to escape any attempt at restraint, remained vivid in her mind. Ethan, in turn, appeared in her memory as a curious figure, serious, almost unyielding, yet with small cracks of humanity that revealed themselves in details, like when he carefully adjusted the blanket over his daughter, or when, for an instant, a shy smile slipped across his face at one of Maya's mischiefs. Olivia couldn't explain why she remembered them so clearly. Strangers usually fade into routine like dust in the wind, yet there was something about that encounter that resisted forgetting. 2 days later, while walking through the streets of Seattle and exploring the city, Olivia felt the fine rain turn the sidewalks into mirrors. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from the open doors of small shops, and she, free of fixed commitments, allowed herself to get lost among corners and storefronts. It was this spirit of freedom that had always defined her, living on opportunities, experiences, moments that appeared almost by chance. She never imagined that among those chances she would encounter little Maya again, running through the aisle of a downtown bookstore, chasing a stubborn red balloon that refused to stay in her hands. "Olivia!" The child's voice rang clear, almost like a song, as the girl abandoned the balloon to embrace the young teacher. Olivia knelt down, surprised and delighted, feeling the small arms around her neck. A few seconds later, Ethan appeared in the background, his expression slightly stunned, as if unable to believe such an improbable reunion could truly be happening. "It seems fate decided to play with us," Olivia said, smiling, while Ethan simply nodded, trying to maintain his firm composure. In that instant, the barrier between them began to give way, even if subtly. They talked a little about the trip, about Olivia's new routine in the city, and about the architecture firm that demanded more hours of Ethan than he cared to admit. Maya, between one question and another, made it clear how much she had grown attached to her new friend. And it was precisely this detail, repeated in childish words and pleading eyes, that planted the seed of the decision Ethan would later make. That very night, sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of blueprints, he watched his daughter draw alone on a sheet of paper. Maya scribbled crooked shapes, yet the strokes seemed full of life. Exhausted, Ethan realized how unfair it was to let her spend so much time in the adult silence of an apartment that, though elegant, lacked warmth. That was when he thought of Olivia. He thought of her smile during the flight, the patience with which she answered Maya's endless questions, the natural way she turned boredom into wonder. The idea seemed bold, even risky, but it was inevitable. He needed help, and Olivia seemed the only one capable of filling that space. 2 days later, with courage gathered and his daughter excited by his side, Ethan went to the small makeshift studio Olivia had set up in a rented apartment. The walls were covered with unfinished canvases, brushes scattered across the table, and the scent of paint mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Olivia greeted him with surprise, though her curiosity was evident at his unexpected visit. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, nervously adjusting his watch. "No, of course not," Olivia replied, motioning for him to come in. Maya had already run to the corner of the room, fascinated by the vivid colors spread across every canvas. Ethan took a deep breath before speaking. He wasn't used to asking for help, much less from someone he had met so recently, but there was in Olivia a kind of trust that defied logical explanations. "I know this may sound strange," he began, his deep voice betraying a trace of embarrassment, "but I've been thinking a lot since we met. My routine is chaotic, and Maya—" He looked at his daughter, now painting with her fingers on a blank sheet. "Deserves more than I can give her right now." Olivia stayed silent, waiting. "I'd like to know if you would consider spending some time with her, taking care of her, maybe as a sort of temporary nanny. I know this isn't something you planned, but—" He paused, choosing his words. "It would be a great help." The request lingered in the air, heavy and unexpected. Olivia, so used to freedom, had never imagined taking on such responsibility in a city that still felt strange to her. But when she looked at Maya, now smiling at her with blue paint on her fingers, her heart softened. The girl radiated a pure trust, as if she had already chosen. "Temporary, you said?" Olivia asked, more to herself than to him. "Yes. A few weeks, maybe less. Just long enough for me to get through deadlines and breathe again," Ethan answered, his voice weighed with sincerity. Olivia drew in a deep breath. Accepting meant giving up part of her autonomy, adjusting her days to someone else's routine. But it also meant opening herself to a new experience, to something that, deep down, felt right. "All right, Ethan, I'll do it." The immediate sparkle in Maya's eyes was the most eloquent response imaginable. She ran to Olivia, hugging her tightly, as if she had gained more than just a caretaker, a friend, a bridge to the world she longed to discover. Ethan, relieved, simply thanked her with a look that said more than words ever could. And so, in that little studio filled with colors, a request turned into a promise. It wasn't just a practical arrangement, it was the beginning of a bond that would alter the course of everyone involved. From then on, the weeks would no longer be blank pages. They would become chapters of a story that chance had written, but the heart would insist on continuing. The first mornings with Maya brought Olivia a new feeling, as if the routine, once loose and unpredictable, now gained delicate contours of commitment and affection. The girl always woke before the sun fully rose, bursting into Olivia's room with hurried steps and an energy that seemed endless. Between sleepy laughter and requests for improvised stories, the days began lightly, guiding the two into a bond that quickly turned into complicity. Ethan, still immersed in deadlines and meetings, watched from a distance as his daughter blossomed by Olivia's side, and a part of him, though reluctant, felt at peace, realizing he was no longer alone in the quiet task of caring. Walks through Seattle's street markets became a ritual. Maya loved strolling among the colorful stalls, tugging Olivia by the hand in search of exotic fruits and fresh flowers. Olivia, with her artistic gaze, turned every visit into an adventure, explaining to the girl how the colors of the fruit seemed to speak to each other, like living brush strokes on a canvas. Maya laughed at the comparisons and gradually began inventing her own metaphors, describing the scent of spices as the smell of a hug, and the sound of people talking as the song of happy ants. Ethan, when he managed to join them on some Saturdays, observed in silence. He did not interfere, simply letting himself be carried by the natural ease of that relationship, almost forgetting how rigid life had once seemed before that unexpected presence. Rainy afternoons in Seattle offered another kind of charm. When clouds covered the city and the drizzle ran down the windows, Olivia and Maya found refuge in small cafes scattered through the old neighborhoods. Maya always chose the sweetest hot chocolate, while Olivia preferred the bitter strength of coffee. Ethan sometimes arrived late, tie loosened, and weariness stamped on his face. In those moments, Olivia noticed something new. The way his shoulders relaxed the moment he sat down, how the stiffness gave way to a discreet sigh, as if simply seeing them together was enough to disarm his defenses. In one of those cafes, Maya began to draw with colorful markers while the rain grew heavier outside. Olivia, curious, leaned over the paper and asked what she was creating. The girl, eyes focused, answered, "A house with big windows, so the sun never forgets about us." Ethan lifted his gaze at that instant, staring at the child's drawing. The simplicity of the lines held something deeply true. Olivia smiled at him, a knowing smile that needed no words. For the first time, he didn't look away. Little by little, the days formed an unexpected routine. There were mornings when Olivia and Maya painted together on large sheets of paper spread across the living room floor. Laughter filled the space as colors spread, staining even their clothes with marks that could never be washed away. There were also late afternoon walks, when Ethan, despite his exhaustion, joined them at the park. There, the architect's rigidity seemed to dissolve as he watched his daughter run between swings, with Olivia at her side encouraging every new attempt to go higher. The three of them, without realizing it, formed the outline of something beginning to resemble a family. Olivia, in turn, felt a subtle transformation within herself. Accustomed to freedom, improvisation, and detachment, she discovered in her time with Maya a new kind of joy, constancy. There was beauty in repeating simple gestures, in preparing breakfast together, in listening to the same invented story for the 10th time. And there was also something harder to ignore in Ethan's quiet presence. Behind the seriousness, she began to see a man who tried, who hid fragilities behind a meticulous routine. Sometimes when they found themselves alone in the kitchen after putting Maya to bed, a different silence lingered between them, heavy with something unspoken yet undeniable. One overcast afternoon, they decided to visit Pike Place Market, one of the city's busiest landmarks. Maya was fascinated by the street performers, the musicians, the jugglers who filled the space with energy. Olivia, enchanted by the flower stalls and the strong sense of spices, shared little discoveries with Maya as if painting the scene with words. Ethan walked a little behind, watching, and for the first time in a long while he didn't feel out of place. On the contrary, he felt that this improvised rhythm, far from schedules and spreadsheets, carried something genuine. Later, when they returned home with bags full of fruits and flowers, Ethan stepped into the kitchen to help Olivia sort everything. The gesture was simple, yet carried an invisible weight. He was not a man accustomed to sharing trivial tasks, used to delegating, to controlling. But there, among the clatter of dishes and the scent of fresh fruit, he found a rare serenity. Olivia noticed but said nothing, letting the silence be filled by the sound of Maya singing in her room. The nights, in the end, became the most anticipated moment. Maya insisted that Olivia read stories before bed, and Ethan, seated by the door, listened in silence. Olivia's soft voice filled the room, turning words into magic. And when the little girl finally fell asleep, there was always that moment when their eyes met in the half-light. No words were spoken, but something began to grow there, quiet, inevitable, like the rain that wets the city in silence before filling the rivers. Life together was becoming steady. Between street markets, cozy cafes, and nights of invented stories, Olivia and Maya had become inseparable. Ethan, almost unknowingly, allowed himself to be included in that circle, even if with cautious steps. It was not just a passing phase. It was the foundation of something that, without haste, was being built stone by stone, gesture by gesture, until it became a bond that could no longer be ignored. The house seemed to breathe differently that night. Seattle's typical chill seeped through the windows, and the soft rain played a constant song against the living room glass. Olivia had decided to make pizza with Maya, turning the kitchen into a space of cheerful chaos. The little girl spread flour over her apron and cheeks, laughing at every failed attempt to roll out the dough. Olivia, equally dusted with white powder, pretended to be a renowned chef, narrating every step with theatrical exaggeration that made the child laugh uncontrollably. Ethan arrived from work later than he wanted. He opened the door exhausted, expecting to find a silent house and his daughter already asleep. Instead, he was greeted by the irresistible smell of baking dough and the sound of laughter echoing from the kitchen. He stood still for a moment in the hallway, slowly removing his coat, unwilling to interrupt the scene. Olivia spun around with her flour-stained apron, pretending to sing as if she were on stage, while Maya clapped along in rhythm, completely enthralled. "Daddy!" the little girl shouted when she noticed his presence. "Come help, we're making real pizza!" Ethan stepped in carefully, as if entering unknown territory. Olivia greeted him with a warm smile, and the ease of the gesture seemed to disarm him. Unsure how to act, he rolled up his sleeves and accepted the invitation. Maya placed the rolling pin in his hands and laughed at the seriousness with which her father tried to perform the task. Amused, Olivia couldn't resist teasing him. "It's not a blueprint, Ethan, you can relax." He looked up and for the first time let out a genuine laugh, short but real. The sound surprised them all, including himself. Maya cheered as if she had just won a rare prize, and Olivia felt a discreet warmth in her chest at the sight of this crack opening in the man who had always seemed shielded by high walls. The pizza came out of the oven with uneven edges and ingredients scattered without order, but no one cared. They sat at the improvised table with colorful cups and wrinkled napkins, as if it were a special banquet. Maya ate enthusiastically, praising every bite as if it were the most delicious meal in the world. Ethan, watching the scene, realized he couldn't remember the last time he had shared such a light meal, without hurry, without a phone buzzing at his side, simply laughing at Olivia's invented stories and his daughter's spontaneous comments. When the girl finished eating, Olivia led her to the living room and played a soft song on her phone. Maya began to dance awkwardly, spinning across the rug, while Olivia joined her with light steps, holding her hands and twirling her as if she were a ballerina. Ethan, leaning against the door frame, watched. His daughter's laughter, Olivia's delicacy, the simplicity of that moment created a scene that seemed almost unreal in his meticulously planned life. Maya, tired, threw herself onto the sofa, still laughing. Olivia covered her with a blanket, stroking her hair until the little girl's eyes slowly closed. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of rain outside. It was then that Ethan moved closer, sitting beside Olivia. The two remained in silence for a while, watching Maya sleep. "She's happy," he said softly, as if not wanting to wake his daughter. "She's wonderful," Olivia replied, still looking at the girl. "She just needs space to be a child." Ethan sighed, and Olivia felt the weight of that gesture. He didn't speak of work or the endless deadlines that usually surrounded him. He simply allowed the silence to stretch until their eyes met by chance and lingered longer than expected. There was something new there, a silent understanding, a closeness that no word dared to interrupt. Olivia stood up and went to the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to Ethan and sat again, this time closer. They spoke little, trivial things, but every sentence carried more weight than it should. The sound of rain, the dim light of the room, and Maya's sleeping presence created an intimate, almost conspiratorial atmosphere. At one moment, Olivia laughed at some random memory, and Ethan, without realizing, laughed along. The ease of it surprised him. Laughing was rare. Rarer still was allowing himself to relax in someone's company. Olivia noticed the change, and a soft warmth spread through her skin. The music still played faintly in the background. Olivia stood to adjust the volume, and Ethan followed her with his eyes, watching the simple movement, yet filled with grace. When she returned, the space between them seemed smaller. "You turn everything into something light," he said, almost in a whisper, as if confessing something he had kept for days. Olivia didn't answer immediately. She simply lifted her eyes to his, letting silence speak. The atmosphere thickened, palpable, almost inevitable. There were no abrupt gestures, only a slow closeness, as if both were still searching for certainty. The first touch was timid, his hand brushing lightly against hers, hesitant. Olivia didn't pull away. On the contrary, she let the contact remain. Their eyes locked again, and this time, neither looked away. The world seemed reduced to that instant. The sound of rain, the warmth of the wine, and the fragile weight of a connection beginning to reveal itself. There were no final words, no promises, just a dense silence, charged with meaning, as if both knew something had changed. The night went on calmly, but inside them something new had begun to grow, discreet and inevitable, like fire hidden beneath ashes. The week followed the same cadence of laughter and small discoveries, but there was a new detail transforming the days. The memory of that night in the living room, the hesitant touch of hands, and the silent closeness that had settled between Olivia and Ethan. They never spoke of it, yet it lingered, hovering over every gesture, every prolonged glance. Maya, unaware of the invisible weight growing between them, carried on with her usual energy, demanding outings, inventing games, and asking for stories before bed. It was in the pauses between these little adventures that the tension surfaced, as if each moment of intimacy drew them closer to a line that sooner or later would be crossed. One evening, Olivia took Maya to a painting workshop at a neighborhood community center. The walls were covered in children's drawings, and tables filled with paints and brushes awaited the little ones. Ethan, who had promised to pick them up after work, arrived earlier than expected. He found Olivia, her hair loosely tied, helping Maya choose colors to paint a giant sun on the paper. The scene, lit by the warm lamps of the hall, struck him as both simple and overwhelming. Olivia didn't notice his presence immediately, but when she did, she smiled with ease. After the activity, they decided to walk home together. Maya ran ahead, jumping in puddles left by the earlier rain. Ethan and Olivia walked side by side, and even though their hands didn't touch, there was a new closeness, as if the air between them was charged with silent electricity. Olivia spoke about the freedom she felt watching children paint without fear of making mistakes, about how spontaneity was, in truth, the purest form of art. Ethan, used to rules, measurements, and precise calculations, listened intently. That simple, almost naive perspective seemed to open a crack in him he had never considered. That same night, after putting Maya to bed, they stayed on the apartment balcony. The city shimmered below, its lights reflecting on the distant lake. Olivia, wrapped in a blanket, held a cup of tea, while Ethan leaned on the railing. The wind carried the scent of rain, and there was a quiet sense of expectancy in the air. "Sometimes I think I don't know how to live outside spreadsheets," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Olivia smiled but didn't mock him. "Maybe you just need other pages. Not all of them have to hold numbers." He looked at her, and in that moment Ethan's eyes revealed something he rarely showed: vulnerability. The usual rigidity gave way to raw sincerity, and Olivia felt that for the first time she was seeing the man beyond the facade. It was in that atmosphere that the confession came, not as a prepared speech, but as an inevitable outpouring. Ethan moved closer, sat beside her, and after a few seconds of silence, he spoke. "I didn't plan any of this. When you came into our lives, I thought it would just be temporary help. But now I can't imagine the house without you." Olivia's heart raced, but she held his gaze. He continued, his voice weighted with honesty. "I'm afraid of failing. With Maya, with everything. But when I see the way she smiles at your side, and when I realize how I feel, I don't think I can keep pretending there isn't something bigger happening here. The silence that followed was deep, but not uncomfortable. Olivia's breath quickened. Her words caught in her throat. Finally, she let them slip. I didn't expect any of this either. But it's as if each day with you both has changed something in me. And I don't want to leave. The weight of their confessions lingered between them, delicate and powerful at once. Then Ethan, still hesitant, leaned a little closer. The gesture was slow, almost timid, as if asking permission. Olivia didn't pull away. On the contrary, she leaned slightly forward, and their first kiss happened with the softness of something long awaited, yet still surprising. There was no rush. The touch was brief, yet filled with intensity. When they parted, both smiled in disbelief, as if astonished that they had finally crossed that invisible line. Olivia rested her head on his shoulder, and for a few minutes they stayed like that, listening only to the sounds of the city and the distant rain. In the days that followed, something had changed. There were no explicit declarations, no exaggerated gestures, but their gazes lingered longer, their smiles came more easily, and the moments they shared were filled with deeper meaning. Cooking together was no longer just a practical task, but a pretext to share laughter. Taking Maya to the park also became an opportunity to walk side by side, feeling the natural ease of being together. One night, while Olivia made up a story for Maya, Ethan sat in the doorway of the bedroom, watching. The scene moved him in a way he couldn't explain. It was more than gratitude, more than companionship. It was a profound feeling, the realization that after so long, he had found a home in something that had nothing to do with walls or architectural projects. Olivia, in turn, began to notice within herself a new kind of restlessness. It was no longer just the urge to explore the world or live untethered experiences. It was the need to stay, to build something with roots. And though fear circled her in silence, she knew she was willing to face the unknown. And so, between conversations on the balcony, laughter in the kitchen, and discreet kisses stolen in the moments when Maya was distracted, the bond between Olivia and Ethan began to take shape. It was no longer just coexistence, nor just friendship. It was the beginning of a love that appeared timid but true, growing like a flame protected from the wind, ready to illuminate whatever lay ahead. The days following the first kiss seemed wrapped in a different atmosphere, as if every gesture, every word carried a silent intensity. Olivia woke up each morning with the feeling she was living something precious, almost too fragile to touch. Ethan, for his part, tried to maintain the rigid routine that had always defined him, but now he noticed cracks, small moments of distraction when he caught himself thinking of Olivia, her easy laughter, the way Maya looked at her with unconditional affection. It was as if life had finally found a new rhythm, and both of them, even without saying it aloud, knew they were on the verge of crossing a point of no return. It was in this setting that the first shadow appeared. One afternoon, Olivia decided to stop by Ethan's architecture office to bring him the lunch he had forgotten at home. The tall building in downtown Seattle stood imposing, its glass walls reflecting the city. Olivia entered with hesitant steps, balancing the small paper bag, smiling at the thought of the surprise she was about to make. At reception, the assistant recognized her as Maya's nanny, and she smiled without thinking. She took the elevator, walked through the sleek hallways, and approached Ethan's office. But before knocking, she heard voices coming from the nearby break room. Two employees were talking in low voices, laughing with each other, unaware of her presence. "He always finds time for a new one," said one, her tone laced with malice. "It's not the first time Ethan gets involved with someone working nearby. And did you see? Now it's the art teacher. He always has a pattern," added the other, laughing as if sharing an intimate secret. The words hit Olivia like a cold gust. She froze, unsure whether to go in or pretend she hadn't heard. The lunch bag suddenly felt heavy, and the spontaneity of her gesture turned into doubt. Without the courage to announce herself, she turned back, leaving the floor in silence, her heart racing, her hands trembling. That night, Ethan came home exhausted as always, but he noticed something different about Olivia. She was more distant, more contained, as if she had built an invisible barrier between them. She smiled less, avoided long glances, and kept herself busy with Maya, pretending not to notice his unease. Ethan tried to ignore it, but the change was palpable, like a cold current running through the room. In the days that followed, doubt grew inside Olivia like a stubborn shadow. The words she had overheard at the office echoed in her mind, repeating like a sentence. Each gesture of affection from Ethan seemed at once sweet and suspicious. Was it genuine or just another chapter in a story he had already lived with others? The memory of their kiss, the whispered confessions on the balcony, battled against the fear of being just one more name in an invisible list of fleeting romances. Olivia said nothing, but her silence betrayed her. Ethan, perceptive, began to notice the distance, though he didn't understand why. He tried to draw closer, inviting her for conversations on the balcony or walks in the park, but Olivia pulled away with excuses, preferring to dedicate herself exclusively to Maya. The little girl, innocent, noticed nothing of the tension. To her, life carried on joyfully with paintings, stories, and games. But between the adults, a chasm was opening. On a particularly quiet night, Olivia was in the kitchen washing dishes when Ethan approached. There was something in his eyes that mixed worry with exhaustion. "What's happening?" he asked softly, almost a whisper, as if afraid of the answer. Olivia took a while to respond. Her wet hands trembled slightly, her heart raced. Finally, she said, "I just think maybe I'm going further than I should." The words sounded cold, distant. Ethan frowned, unable to understand. "Further than you should?" "Olivia, I don't understand." She couldn't say more. The words trapped in her throat were too many, yet all felt too fragile to voice. How could she confess she was afraid of being just a disposable chapter in his life? How could she admit that the rumors of strangers had corroded the trust just beginning to grow? Instead, she stayed silent. Ethan respected her silence, but uncertainty followed him into the night. Olivia, in the next room, cried quietly, unable to find answers to the battle raging inside her. She loved the lightness of her days with Maya, loved the way Ethan looked at her when he let go of his rigidity. But fear, cruel and persistent, insisted on reminding her that perhaps she was mistaken. Perhaps she was simply repeating a story he had already lived many times. The days that followed were marked by a growing distance. Ethan tried to understand, but Olivia closed herself off more with each attempt. And when the silence became unbearable, she began to consider leaving. It wouldn't be fair to prolong something that, to her, already felt tainted by doubt. The inner conflict grew like a silent storm, corroding what had once felt solid. Olivia wrestled between the memory of happy moments and the weight of the words she had overheard. Deep down, she knew she would soon have to decide, even if it meant abandoning something that, for a brief instant, had felt too real to be only a dream. The decision didn't come suddenly, but like fine rain accumulating until it overflowed. Olivia spent days trying to push away her doubts, but each of Ethan's smiles seemed shadowed, each gesture of affection turned into a question. The words she had heard at the office returned as a relentless echo, reminding her that maybe she was just another passage in his life. The weight of uncertainty became unbearable, and the only way out she could find was to leave before it was too late. On the morning she decided to go, the Seattle sky was gray, as if reflecting her own state of mind. Maya ran into her room, still sleepy, asking for the same story she always heard before breakfast. Olivia hugged her tightly, more than usual, holding back tears as she realized how much she already missed that simple gesture, even before saying goodbye. The girl, oblivious to the storm raging inside her, smiled as always, asking to paint together later. Olivia just nodded, knowing she wouldn't be there to keep that promise. Ethan left early, leaving some scribbled papers on the table, a sign he would dive once again into endless deadlines. Olivia watched him from afar before he closed the door. There were no words, just a brief look that carried a heavy silence. For a moment she wished he would notice, that he would stop her, that he would say something strong enough to break down the wall of doubt. But Ethan, unaware of what was happening, left without imagining that this would be the last day he would see her in his home. The hours that followed were slow, heavy with invisible farewells. Olivia walked through the rooms, touching the walls, looking at the pictures, memorizing the details that had already become part of her routine. In the kitchen, she remembered the nights of improvised pizza. In the living room, the clumsy dances with Maya. On the balcony, the whispered confessions under the rain. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory, and each one hurt like an open wound. She packed her things in silence, folding her clothes slowly, as if each movement were a goodbye. Among her belongings, she also kept the drawings Maya had given her, little colorful papers that seemed to contain all the innocence in the world. As she held one of them, tears finally escaped. It wasn't just the end of living together, it was the breaking of a bond that had taken root deeper than she had ever imagined. When the time came to say goodbye to Maya, Olivia's heart almost gave up on the decision. The girl hugged her tightly, asking when she would return. Olivia smiled with effort, promising they would see each other soon, though inside she knew she wasn't certain. Maya believed her without question, with the absolute trust only a child can give. Olivia left the apartment carrying that trust like an unbearable weight, aware that she was leaving behind not only a child, but also a part of herself. At the train station, the movement of people contrasted with the stillness she felt inside. She held her small suitcase as if it were too heavy, and the announcements on the loudspeaker sounded distant, almost unreal. When the train arrived, Olivia stepped inside with hesitant steps, choosing a seat by the window. As the city began to disappear into the landscape, an overwhelming pain filled her chest. There was no farewell letter for Ethan, no explanation. Only silence, heavy with fear and the bitter taste of cowardice. Olivia justified it to herself as self-protection, a way to avoid being hurt, but deep down she knew she was also causing pain. Looking out the window, she watched the streets she had learned to love vanish behind her, and each mile of distance felt like a piece being torn from her. As the train advanced, memories came in sequence. Their first meeting on the plane, the surprising coincidence at the bookstore, the strolls through the market, the afternoons of coffee and hot chocolate, Maya's laughter, Ethan's gaze on the balcony. Everything blended like a broken mosaic, beautiful and painful at the same time. Olivia closed her eyes, wishing for a moment that she could erase the words she had heard, that she could trust completely, that she wasn't a prisoner of fear. In Portland, her hometown that once felt familiar, Olivia walked like a stranger. The well-known streets offered no comfort, only reminders of what she had left behind. In her small apartment, she scattered her belongings across the empty space, but nothing seemed to fit. The canvases, the brushes, the scents. Everything was impregnated with memories that didn't belong to that place. When she tried to paint, her hands hesitated, as if the colors had lost their intensity. The nights became long, far too silent. Olivia lay in bed, hearing the echoes of distant laughter she could no longer reach. Maya's face came to her mind like a constant calling, and Ethan's gaze, marked by the honesty she now doubted, haunted her again. She tried to convince herself that she had done the right thing, that leaving was a form of self-preservation, but every argument crumbled before the weight of absence. Ethan in Seattle noticed the change immediately. When he returned home, he found the room empty, the walls silent, the absence of the colors Olivia used to spread wherever she went. He asked the neighbors, tried to call but found no answers. Maya cried, asking where her friend was, and Ethan, unable to explain, simply held her in silence, feeling that something precious had been torn from their lives. And so, separation settled like an open wound, painful and inevitable. Olivia, in Portland, tried to convince herself she was free, but each day the emptiness grew. Ethan, in Seattle, struggled to return to his routine, but discovered that life no longer carried the same meaning without her presence. And between them, Maya, innocent and confused, carried in silence the absence that no embrace could fill. The suitcase still rested in the corner of the room, untouched since her return to Portland, as if it were a silent reminder of what Olivia was trying to forget. The canvases scattered around the small apartment remained blank, and each abandoned brush on the table exposed her inability to create. It was night when, searching for a scarf forgotten among wrinkled clothes, she found a carefully folded envelope lost among her belongings. The paper bore her name written in Ethan's firm handwriting, and for a moment Olivia hesitated to open it, as if that gesture could undo the distance she had placed between them. With trembling hands, she slid her finger along the flap and revealed the letter. The first lines were simple, almost restrained, as if Ethan had fought against his own reserve to write. He spoke of the days when her presence had brought lightness to his routine, of how Maya had smiled differently since Olivia had entered their lives. The words weren't adorned. There were no exaggerations, only the sincerity of someone who didn't know how to speak of feelings except directly. You are not just another one. You never were. From the very first moment I saw you, everything changed. He wrote in a passage that made Olivia's eyes fill with tears. As she read on, she felt each phrase open a crack in her armor of distrust. Ethan described moments that seemed ordinary, the smell of coffee on rainy mornings, the way she laughed at Maya's stories, their balcony conversations, but that had become precious memories for him. He confessed his fear of seeming too fragile, of exposing himself, but made it clear he could no longer silence what he felt. I don't want you to be temporary. I want you to stay, to build with us what I still don't know how to name, but what already feels like home in my heart. Olivia read and reread every line as if searching between the words for the man she had so often found indecipherable. The image of Ethan, methodical and reserved, dissolved in the vulnerability stamped in his words. This was not the rigid, distant architect she had imagined, but someone who, even in fear, dared to offer what was most intimate. The memory of the rumors that had driven her away seemed to lose its strength in the clarity of that letter. And for the first time, Olivia wondered if she had allowed the voices of others to silence the truth that had always been right before her eyes. Tears ran freely as she folded the paper carefully, as if it were a sacred object. She sat on the edge of the bed, pressing the letter against her chest, and felt the weight of the decision she had made. It wasn't just about leaving a house or breaking a routine. It was the loss of something rare, built with tenderness, and now revealed in words as simple as they were irreversible. For days, the letter remained on the table, open, as if it were impossible to keep it in a drawer. Olivia woke and read random passages, as if drawing strength from each phrase. The lonely nights turned into long reflections, and Ethan's voice, imagined in every word, began to fill the silence of the apartment. The memory of Maya made everything even more painful. Her innocent laughter, her colorful drawings, her requests for bedtime stories. Olivia wondered how she could have abandoned the girl without explanations, and each thought hurt more than any rumor ever could. There were moments when she rose, determined to return immediately, but the fear of rejection paralyzed her. What if Ethan did not forgive her for the abrupt way she had left? What if Maya had already learned to live without her? Yet the letter insisted on repeating the same certainty. He wanted her in his life, not as a passing presence, but as permanence. That idea began to take root, displacing the doubts, until Olivia realized there was no longer any way to escape the truth. On a cold afternoon, she went out to walk through the streets of Portland with the folded letter in her coat pocket. The wind blew strong, but she felt a different warmth, as if those words were pushing her forward. She wandered aimlessly for hours, revisiting memories, until she sat on a park bench and finally admitted to herself that she was in love in a way that could no longer be denied. The fear was still there, but now it coexisted with an even greater certainty. She needed to go back. She needed to tell Ethan and Maya that she loved them. She needed to accept that she had been wrong to doubt. That night, for the first time since leaving, Olivia packed a suitcase without hesitation. She folded some clothes, placed brushes and sketchbooks inside, but above all she packed the letter, like a guide and an amulet. Every movement felt like a step toward something that frightened her and at the same time set her free. Her heart raced, not from the fear of losing herself, but from the hope of finding herself again. As she closed the zipper, a thought crossed her mind. There might be no guarantees of how she would be received. There might be hurt. She might need to fight to regain trust. But none of that mattered in the face of the clarity that life beside Ethan and Maya was what she truly desired. The letter had shown her that love is not proven in rumors, but in silent gestures and words written with sincerity. Olivia turned off the lights of the apartment, held her suitcase, and took a deep breath. Outside, the city seemed indifferent to her dilemma, but inside her a revolution was taking place. She carried memories in her heart, tears in her eyes that no longer shamed her, and in her hands the courage that had been missing for so long. Ethan's letter was not just a plea but an invitation to believe once more, and now, at last, Olivia was ready to accept it. The flight back to Seattle felt shorter, though the distance was the same. Olivia sat by the window, clutching her suitcase tightly, and the letter folded in her pocket. The city below slowly emerged from the clouds, and with every minute closer to the airport, her heart beat faster. There was fear, of course, fear of what she would find, fear of how Ethan would react. But there was also a deeper certainty that finally imposed itself. She needed to repair what she had left behind. She needed to see Maya again, and the man who had become indispensable. When she landed, Seattle welcomed her with the scent of rain and the distant hum of traffic. She took a taxi to Ethan's neighborhood, but instead of going straight to the apartment, she decided to stop at his sister's garden, a place where so many memories had been quietly shared. Ethan's sister had a small garden surrounded by old trees, soft lights, and flowers that looked as though they had been painted by hand, and Olivia felt that space would be the perfect place for a new beginning. As she walked along the stone paths, Maya spotted her and came running with her usual energy, the laughter that had once become music in her life echoing through the garden. The girl stopped, breathless, and hugged Olivia tightly, as if she had saved that embrace for weeks. "I knew you'd come back," Maya exclaimed between laughter and tears. Olivia smiled, holding Maya in her arms, feeling that every second of absence had been erased in that gesture. Then Ethan appeared, walking slowly among the trees, his eyes fixed on her. Olivia's heart almost leapt from her chest. He seemed restrained, but in his gaze there was a mix of anxiety and relief, the same vulnerability revealed in the letter. Each step he took seemed to carry the weight of mountains, and when he finally stopped before her, silence fell, absolute, heavy with meaning. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady but trembling, "I don't know if I can put into words how long I've waited for this moment." She only smiled, holding Maya's hand and feeling Ethan's other hand reach for hers. Words weren't needed, for the time apart had spoken for itself. But Ethan continued, sincerity written on his face. "When you left, I realized what it truly meant to have both of you in my life. I don't want to lose anything anymore. Not a day, not a laugh, not one of Maya's paintings spread across the kitchen. Will you stay with us? Will you marry me and make this family permanent?" The weight of Ethan's words made Olivia's heart race. Every fear, every doubt seemed to dissolve in that instant. The promise contained in the letter materialized there, before her eyes, in the hands of the man who had waited with patience and courage to be heard. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the smile spreading across her lips. "Yes," she finally answered, her voice firm but thick with emotion. "Yes, Ethan, I will." Maya, ecstatic, jumped into their arms, hugging them both in a burst of pure joy. The garden, lit by the soft glow of lanterns hanging among the trees, seemed to shine even brighter, reflecting the happiness that now enveloped the trio. Ethan pulled her closer, wrapping her in an embrace that sealed everything they had lost and everything they had gained. They remained like that for minutes that felt eternal, feeling the closeness, the warmth, and the certainty that this was the beginning of something greater. Olivia looked at Ethan and he at her, and without words, they understood that the separation and the pain had only deepened the bond they shared. Later, they sat on the garden bench, still holding on to one another, talking about the future, about the small adventures they wanted to live together, and about the simple moments they would make sure to protect. Maya, overjoyed, told made-up stories about how she had imagined Olivia's return and about the drawings she would create to decorate their new home. Ethan and Olivia laughed together, feeling that life had finally taken a path full of colors, laughter, and real promises. When night fell, the garden glowed softly, and Ethan held Olivia's hand again, now with the certainty that every gesture, every wait, had been worth it. They remained there, together, while Maya fell asleep in Olivia's arms, feeling that the family they had longed for already existed, complete in its imperfection and in its beauty. The reunion was not only a victory over physical distance, it was a reconciliation with what they felt, an acknowledgement that true love endured rumors, fears, and insecurities. Every step Olivia had taken from Portland to Seattle, every tear and every doubt culminated in that moment of clarity. They belonged to one another, and nothing could undo that. In the silence of the garden, just the three of them breathing together, Olivia felt that she had returned not just to a city, but to a home. And there, under the soft glow of lanterns and with Maya's breathing against her shoulder, she understood that the courage to face fears and insecurities had finally been rewarded. Ethan's proposal was not merely a request for marriage. It was the promise of days shared, of building a future, of a love that resisted time and distance. And so, with hands intertwined, knowing glances, and hearts beating in harmony, Olivia, Ethan, and Maya began a new chapter. A chapter that, unlike the one before, would not have silent doubts or painful absences. It was the beginning of a true family, ready to face whatever came their way together, sustained by trust, by affection, and by the love they had finally allowed to bloom. The day dawned in Seattle with scattered clouds and rays of sunlight timidly piercing through the buildings, casting golden reflections over Lake Union. The house by the lake, chosen for the wedding, was already alive with movement. Family members, friends, decorators, and children running across the gardens, each carrying their own unique and unexpected energy. Olivia woke with her heart racing, feeling that mix of joy and nervousness that only comes when one is about to live the most meaningful moment of their life. In front of the mirror, she dressed carefully, feeling the fabric of her gown glide across her skin, imagining the moment she would meet Ethan before everyone. Maya, radiant, helped Olivia place the final touches on her hair and dress. Every ribbon tied was followed by laughter. Every flower pinned was a reason for praise. Ethan, already dressed in his carefully chosen suit, watched the bustle in the hall, trying to control the anxiety growing with each passing minute. Maya didn't stop for a second, running down the hallway with contagious energy. And Ethan smiled as he realized that, even in the midst of all the rush, everything had its own order. Joy was the guiding thread of the day. When the first guests began to arrive, the joy intensified. Olivia's family, lively and talkative, filled the house carrying gifts, cameras, and opinions about every detail of the ceremony. Loud laughter, comments, children running around, but somehow it all reflected the essence of the family being formed. Ethan sighed deeply, realizing that life would never again be as methodical as before. Olivia, in turn, laughed at the chaos, feeling that everything was exactly as she had hoped, imperfect, noisy, and full of life. The garden was decorated with lights strung between the trees, colorful flowers scattered along the stone paths, and small lanterns illuminating the way to the improvised altar by the lake. Guests settled in, their conversations and laughter filling the air. A gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and the freshness of the lake, making the setting almost magical. Olivia walked through the garden while Ethan, nervous and smiling at once, waited for the moment he would see her appear. When the music began, signaling the start of the ceremony, Maya handed Olivia her bouquet of flowers. Time seemed to slow down. Ethan watched her with shining eyes, absorbing every detail, her soft smile, the gown swaying with the breeze, the confidence radiating from her every step. She was the woman he had waited for, the mother of his daughter at heart, and now his wife, walking into his life forever. During the ceremony, emotions ran high, and small mishaps happened. A cousin stumbled, knocking over a few flowers. A guest spoke louder than intended, drawing amused glances. Maya, excited, tried to fix everything with dramatic gestures and giggles, and Olivia laughed at the scene, realizing that imperfection was exactly what made that moment real. Ethan, holding her hand tightly, also smiled, taking in each second with a sense of completeness that no amount of planning could guarantee. When it came time for the vows, Ethan spoke first, his voice firm but filled with emotion. He declared his love, his admiration, and his promise to care for Olivia forever, vowing days full of laughter, support, and courage. Olivia, tears in her eyes, replied, speaking of how life had changed since meeting him, of the value of family, and of the certainty that this was where she belonged. Every word spoken seemed to seal not only the ceremony, but the entire journey that had brought them there, marked by unexpected encounters, fears, and reconciliations. The final kiss was greeted with applause and shouts of joy, blending with the light breeze that passed over the lake. Maya, glowing, embraced them both, and the sound of the water reflecting the lantern's light created a magical and unforgettable atmosphere. Soon after, family and friends gathered around, bringing gifts, hugs, and congratulations to the couple, turning the ceremony into a joyful and lively celebration, exactly as Olivia and Ethan had always wished. The garden reception continued with music, food, and laughter. Children ran across the lawn, adults chatted animatedly, and small mishaps occurred at every turn. A spilled glass of wine, a chair tipping over, a cake that nearly fell. But none of it diminished the joy. On the contrary, it made the moment even more memorable, more real. Olivia and Ethan danced together for the first time as husband and wife, laughing at stumbles and steadying each other's awkward steps, while Maya watched with delight. The garden lights reflected on the lake, creating a modern fairy tale scene. Olivia, seated beside Ethan, held his hand, feeling Maya's breath against her shoulder, and realized that this was only the beginning. The wedding, with all its mishaps and laughter, symbolized what truly mattered. The family they had built, made of love, courage, and acceptance of imperfections. As the last guests said their goodbyes and the garden began to empty, Olivia looked at Ethan and smiled. He returned her gaze, and in that instant, there was no past, no pain, no separation. There was only the present, full of life, color, laughter, and love. The family was complete, and every chaos, every confusion, every loud, unexpected laugh was proof that happiness didn't need to be perfect, only true. And so, beside Ethan and Maya, Olivia felt she had finally found her place in the world. Amid the imperfection and beauty of everyday life, their journey would continue, full of surprises and challenges. But now, with the certainty that they would face it all together, as a family, as a home, as a love that endured and grew stronger with each passing moment. The wedding became, forever, the symbol of what they had conquered, an imperfect but complete love, and the courage to live fully what the heart had always known to be true. And so, everyone, if you were moved by the story of Olivia, Ethan, and Maya, don't forget to subscribe to Enchanting Stories and become part of our magical community that keeps growing. Like the video, share it, and come laugh and dream with us. I want to know, from which city are you watching us? Drop it in the comments, and get ready for many more enchanting stories yet to come.